Hey, everybody. It's Monday night. Welcome to Pine Island Research here at the Untold Radio Network Studios. Awesome show this morning. It was fun hanging out with some of you at coffee time. It was fun. We shared a lot of different types of videos. Some of them were kind of playful. Some of them were interesting, but it was a fun show. And we're not going to be doing a show next week for the week of 4th of July. I'm going to be kind of off the grid there again. And it's not going to work out. So I'm excited tonight. We've got a special guest that I had seen an interview done with him on YouTube in the past, and he had shared some of his experiences. I thought it was really interesting. I thought, man, I'd like to get him on the show because it is the type of guest that most of you are intrigued by. Somebody who is well-spoken and is good at sharing experiences. He has a kind of a small organization, and him and a couple friends that they put some dedication into the way that they approach the subject of Sasquatch when they get out in the outdoors and spend time out there. And it's well thought out. And I thought that what a great way to let you guys hear about it rather than just have him come on. So I'm going to bring him on. Hey, Marshall, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you taking the time to join us and share some of your experiences.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to talk away.
Well, tell everybody a little bit about where you're from, kind of give them a background.
Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of I don't want to say a roamer, but I guess I kind of am a little bit. I mean, I grew up in the Missouri Ozarks, Southwest Missouri, and from there moved after university and stuff, moved to San Francisco Bay Area and was in the Bay Area for 25 years and then got a new job offer, an opportunity to move to British Columbia, actually in Vancouver. And from there, I've basically explored a lot of British Columbia. And there's been some very interesting things that I've came across up here, and that's kind of what got us interested in doing some more research and looking into it. But probably if I, put on the Wayback Machine here and go way back, the first encounter I had would have been somewhere in the early 1970s in Southwest Missouri, kind of down around a city called Gainesville. So it's pretty close to the Arkansas border down in there. It's pretty rough and rugged area. For those who don't necessarily know a lot about the Ozarks, I mean, the Ozarks is actually one of the oldest mountain ranges in the United States, and has been around for hundreds of thousands of years. The region, a lot of the region didn't really get paved roads until the 1950s. So there were, a lot of hill folks and living back in the middle of nowhere. And, there's always been some stories that came out of there. When I was younger, there was a story about Momo, the Missouri monster. I think there was actually there might have been a movie or something about that. And I found it kind of interesting. But mainly where my first situation happened is I was with my mom and dad and my younger sister, and we were deer hunting in November for the opening weekend on some private property that was down in the area. And I think it was around 400 acres of property. So it was difficult to get back into it. In those days, there were a whole lot of four-wheel drive vehicles, but my mom had a little old convertible that we were able to straddle the ruts and everything and get back in there. But
it's funny when you recall back the things that happened when we were children that our parents did with big old two-wheel drive boats, Now it's like we can't go anywhere without four-wheel drive.
I know. That's the way it is. It's with anything though, even with my four-wheel drive, I've learned how to drive it. You don't go in there going crazy, but yeah. So we were in there and got in kind of late in the afternoon and got set up, and we were going to stay in the old log cabin that was there. that just basically it just had kind of one window that was in the door. I remember, getting in there, and it was that typical, Missouri early November cold. So we got a fire going in the wood cabin in the old wood stove that was in there, and I remember, started waking up the wasps and stuff that started flying down. And my dad was deathly afraid of wasps, but that kind of paled in comparison to what happened later that night. So we go to bed and get the lights shut off, and somewhere around probably 2 o'clock in the morning or something, the cabin starts getting pelted by what sounded like rocks. So something was throwing rocks at the cabin. I mean, there's no other way around it. And there again, nobody could really walk into this area. It would be too far a walk. If anybody drove in, you would have heard them coming in the way it was set up. And I remember Dad getting up and try to get a flashlight and shine it out the front window. And he just, there's no way he was going to go outside. Absolutely not. He was just terrified. And, the next day we get up and go out, and something had brushed up against my mom's car. So there was an area where the road salts or the dirt and stuff had been kind of brushed off. And I said, well, to Dad, I said, well, oh, that's weird. What did that? And he goes, oh, it was probably a deer licking on the car. And, I'm at that time, what am I? I'm probably 6 or 7. So 8, I don't really know exactly how old I was, but you don't question your parents. At least at that
Dad
time.
says
At that time
gospel,
you didn't.
What Dad says is gospel.
Yeah, it was. So we basically, as far as I can remember, we just stayed that one night, and Dad said we're getting out of here. So we left, and we didn't come back to that property to hunt until somewhere around, I think it was about 1975 or 76. So it would have been 4 or 5 years. And Dad still wouldn't go in by where the old cabin is. We would enter now from the back property and stay. We had a truck and camper, and we would stay way back there. But there's no way Dad was going to get anywhere near that cabin after that incident. And so it was there again in another deer season when that year, as I was basically, the cabin was down here. There was a wooded ridge top up here, and I had a tree stand up here that I was in, and it'd been setting up there. And as kids, you get bored, and it was somewhere around 10:30 or something like that. And I had my knife out. I was kind of carving my name on the wood, my stand and stuff. And then you had the spidey sense, that sense of, okay, something's here. And I've always had that. I've had it numerous times. It's like the hair on the back of your neck comes up. It's the old fight or flight syndrome that is in pretty much all of us, and it's self-protection. We have a lot of senses that people are not aware of. I mean, if you do go to our Quatch Trek channel, we have it over on YouTube. I've done a lot of research. There's several episodes where we talk about sensory perception. We also talk and we interview people about, incidents of rock throwing, and the approach that we take on that is more of a research. And when I say research, it's not researching what, Sasquatch or Bigfoot actually, necessarily does, but in the natural world, how does camouflage work? How does this work? So if you can base your thought process on the known, what is the given, then you can start eliminating things when you have encounters that you go, okay, it wasn't that because of this. I mean, I have an episode that goes into vocalizations, and it's really creepy. I mean, some of the stuff you're like, what is that? I mean, you hear a lot of it. It's like, I heard someone crying and screaming out in the woods, and a lot of times, that's a cougar or a mountain lion or a bobcat actually that does those vocalizations. Foxes make some crazy noises. But if you don't, you have to educate yourself in the wilderness. I grew up a lot of times in the woods. I grew up, like I said, early age, very small, out with my grandparents hunting and fishing. So for me, I usually know when something's out of whack.
Yeah.
And so this particular time when I was up in the stand, I looked over and across the field. The field had been cleared a few years ago, but there had been a second growth of stuff coming up after it had been logged, and I saw something running along the tree line, and it was moving at the speed of a sprinter. I don't think I could have ran that fast. I'm not a sprinter. I'm not a very fast person, but whatever it was moving fast. It was hairy, and it was a long brown hair, and just booking like you would not believe. There again, I'm a poor kid in Missouri. I don't have a pair of binoculars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even have a scope on my gun, so I have no way to magnify to see what it is I'm seeing. All I know is that the weekend prior to that, there had been another hunter on an adjoining property just down over the hill where whatever this was heading had killed a deer. So there was definitely a gut pile down there. So there was a food source. There was something going on. I got back to camp. Like I said, I'm 15. I tell my dad and friends about it, and they're like, "Oh, it was just a bear. It's just a bear." Well, in Southwest Missouri, there were not a lot of bears at that time, and whatever this was running upright. So I've done some research. Go look at, bears on their hind legs. Most of them look kind of like the circus bear. That they're not meant to.
Two or three steps are pretty much maxed out.
Yeah, they're not going to run. So this whole thing about you saw a bear running, and it's like, it was just one of those things, and what clicked for me was I ended up shooting a deer in that field a few days later, and went down to get it and field dress it out, and I realized that the regrowth of the trees was about my height, so that was about 5 feet tall. So whatever I was seeing was a good 2 to 3 feet above that regrowth. So whatever it would have been somewhere in the 8-foot range. Did I think it was Sasquatch at that time? No, I had no idea what it was. It was just one of those things I couldn't explain, and I still to this day, can't explain it. And that's part of what this thing, kind of what we're doing with our Quatch trek here, because Quatch is short for Sasquatch, of course, and trek, a trek is basically, it's considered a long and arduous journey, which anybody who's searching for these creatures, it is a long and arduous journey. I'm sure we've all gone through, or you've gone through, to get through that type of stuff. One thing, I will say that we have, I guess it's in the back of our mind is our concern. Both Keegan and I have drones. We have cameras. I'm a photographer. I do a lot of photography, and so does Keegan. Does a lot of that stuff. My background, and I always have to come clean with people, I'm a visual effects supervisor. So when I say visual effects supervisor, I make movie magic. So my job is to fool people, basically. So we have that concern, is that if we do get footage, that people are just going to say, "Oh, those are visual effects guys. They just created it." So that's the one thing that we've got to find a way to overcome any evidence that we do find. You can see behind me. I worked on Casper and War of the Worlds and Van Helsing and the Hulk and the Star Wars movies. So for us, what that also means for us is that when we look at footage of people putting out there, we can debunk a lot of stuff, because you look at it and there's certain things that, as a supervisor who does visual effects, that you look for. Simple stuff, black levels, your grain, focus. So there's a lot of stuff out there, and there's some footage that people swear is real, but you look at it, it's like, well, it's right in front of a tree stump, and it's out of focus, and he's sharp, and then this other thing behind him is you sit there and you can basically break it apart and find out all of these issues of things that are wrong. So that was kind of my experience in the Ozarks. And like I said, I didn't really think much about it. It wasn't until later in life that it started maybe ringing a bell, like, what exactly did I see? And I'm still, I mean, am I a skeptic? It's like, I mean, I think all things are possible. The question there again, if all things are probable, I mean, that's what it comes down to. So you have to sit down and look. And like I said, I try to take, and we try to take the very scientific approach. Like I said, if you go through and look in our YouTube channel there on Quatch Trek, you'll see that there's these segments where, like I said, we really dive down and investigate it. Now we have seen some footprints in our location up there, and I ended up having my little iPhone, and if you take photos from multiple angles all the way around, there's software that we utilize a lot to do what they call photo modeling. So we brought that in, did a photo model of this print, and that allows me to take it and I can spin it around and move it around and look at it from different angles at a scrutiny that you can't do with a plaster cast, and also that you can't do actually really on location, because you can't see all the detail that might be there. It was a print that was about 12 inches long, somewhere in that area. And it was in our primary search area that we're doing here in British Columbia, along the same kind of route that we think that they migrate through into our area. So that's kind of, one thing that we're focusing on and working towards.
It's interesting because I there's a lot of different areas in the country where people will really start talking about migration, and you start looking at, to me, most migration is going to be based on resources. It might not be long range. If they run out of a resource in one area, they may move 50 miles, 150 miles, whatever, to find another area with that resource. But there is an interesting, I don't know if I'd call it a corridor just because of the width of it, but most of my research is done up here in northern Minnesota, and you look at southern Saskatchewan, southern Manitoba, northern Minnesota, the UP of Michigan, Wisconsin, pretty thick forests, right?
Yep.
And then you look at the terrain in the Appalachian, or not the Appalachian, but down in Missouri, and you start realizing what's in the Ozarks and how remote and thick it can get in those areas too.
Yeah.
What I find interesting is the almost lack of terrain in the farmland across Iowa and the southern third of Minnesota. But yet there's sightings that happen there at certain times a year. And I start looking at those areas and start realizing some of this may be some migratory movement. I mean, I know it on a map, you're talking 450 miles, right? But, moving at night, moving fairly quick, you're talking about something that can be done in a couple of weeks. And if you're wanting to avoid that 0 degrees, 40-mile-an-hour winds of the upper northern Minnesota climate with the harsh reality of winter up there, getting into the Ozarks, not to say it doesn't snow and doesn't get cold there, obviously, but it's a different climate and a different set of resources.
Yeah.
And it just may be feasible that some of these sightings that occur in Iowa along the river valleys, but for the most part, not very forested areas, may just be because they're trying to migrate from point A to point B, not because they're in Iowa all the time. I refuse to believe they are.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And I think, that's one thing, the river bottoms are the highways in the Midwest growing up there. I mean, that's where a lot of things travel. I mean, deer travel that area. There's a lot of cover. a lot, just usually easier traveling and have a lot of cover in those areas.
Yeah.
Which could be it. I mean, the area that we're doing our primary search up here in the wintertime, we'll get upwards to 5 or 6 feet of snow. And for the most part, because I have trail cameras I put out year round, usually come like January 1st or 2nd, I don't pick up any deer on the cameras. They don't return back into the area until usually April. So they're moving out. And my understanding by talking to a lot of the long time kind of locals up in that area, they said, yeah, most of the deer move down the valley where it's warmer. Because the area we get a lot more snow and they move out of there. The moose do stay in there though. So we have came across a moose kill that was in pretty dense forest. We had there's a primary lake that is our search area because that's where we've had a few encounters there. And when I say encounters, it's the first time we had the encounter there is we had a little bush range and we were target practicing kind of on the not too far, probably within a half a mile of where the lake was, but the lake was here and we were back over this way here, and I had seen the lake on the map and I wanted to put a trail camera up in that area. So after we were done target practicing, we came around and found the lake and walked in, and there's maybe about a 40-50 foot corridor between the road and dropping down through the woods to the lake. And then on the other side is basically it drops down to the river. So it's what I call a natural pinch point. Anything that's going to be traveling up and down that side of the river has to go through there. I mean, that's the path. That's where you go. So I'm like, hey, game trail, look at this game trail. It's really worn. So let's put a camera up here. And I was putting the camera up and Keegan, who's another one, like I said, he's another member of the Quatch Trek team. He went over and was relieving himself. Actually, he probably shouldn't have been doing it, but into the lake, relieving himself, and we were laughing about something while I was finishing it up, and then all of a sudden, off to our left in the forest, we hear a whack. And basically, we kind of, for him, it was kind of Pius interruptus. He said suddenly he could not finish what he was doing. It scared him so much. And I've had some people saying, oh, well, it was like, it must have been a birch tree expanding. What time of year was it? I said, well, it was in the spring. So it's not like a birch tree exploding, which they'll happen because the way the moisture is in the birch tree, they'll explode. I said, the similar sound of this is you take a baseball bat, a wooden baseball bat, and walk up to a tree and swing full force against that tree trunk. And that's the whack that we heard. So it was definitely a wood on wood whack. We immediately just said, we just need to leave the area. I said, I got the camera up. Let's see if the camera captures anything. Let's back out of here and let it do its job. So that was kind of what we call the May long weekend. The camera, caught some animals. It did get something that we can't quite explain that is feeling like it's levitating about 4 or 5 feet off the ground. I don't think it's a deer because it's just this very bizarre shape, and at that height, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But we have also gotten a lot of deer that we catch running. And when I say running, it's they're going full force through there, both directions. So something has spooked them, and they're really not wanting to stay that area. So they really want to get out of there. One of that could have been, we saw something that could have been a wolf that was chasing one of them. It was kind of hard to say. So there again, all of the predators know about this area. And like I said, we've done kind of extensive walking around in there. Now, the interesting thing that on one of our little treks that we've yet to really edit together, but we were walking through there, and we were coming across what essentially were clubs from like a birch tree, which birch, if it's seasoned, is a really hard wood. But they were maybe like 4 inches in diameter and probably 4.5 feet long, and they were wedged into the forest floor along the trail. So they weren't. We looked because there was no birch trees that like a branch fell off and wedged there. I mean, it appeared that these were intentionally placed here. I'm just going to say, if I'm a critter that hunts or needs to get protein, and there again, I go into animals like this. What would it take to sustain a Sasquatch or Bigfoot? They're probably an herbivore, much like us. They eat a little bit of everything.
Sure.
They're not just a carnivore. They're just opportunistic, I would think. But that means that they would probably do some form of hunting. Pinch point, it would make sense. Would you? I mean, if I'm a Bigfoot and I'm walking through the forest, do I want to walk around with a club all the time? Or if I go a set route, wouldn't it make sense just to leave some clubs around for you? It's like,
that's something that I've talked about in the past, and it's something that I wrote about in my book, and that I don't believe. I mean, you first of all, you've got to try to get out of our headspace and try to place yourself in that position of that predator.
Yeah.
What it would look like, what it would feel like, what it would require. And I don't care how powerful you feel they are. If you're talking 8 to 9 foot tall and 700 to 900 pounds, chasing a deer and killing it is not going to be easy. It's going to have to be done from an ambush standpoint.
Yeah.
And so finding those choke points, finding those A, B, and C points like I do as a bow hunter, I look at a map and I say, if it's a new area to me, I say, where do they eat? Where do they get water? And where do they bed down? Once I understand where those 3 most plausible likely areas are, I see corridors in which I would want to place myself to try to intercept those travel routes between A, B, and C. I don't think, that's pretty primal and basic.
Yeah.
I don't think they would operate far from that type of an ideal. I mean, if they know where these deer are eating and they know where they go to drink, I don't need to chase one around. I need to get myself concealed and ambushed,
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of common sense placed in that. But,
yeah. And that's what you have to look at. I mean, and as far as tool using, I mean, even if you look at the chimpanzees, I mean, they weren't aware until, they had observed the chimpanzees actually using tools and actually teaching from them. So yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons too, I think maybe wood knocks are heard a lot, is because that if, like I said, if this is an area that someone inhabited, there's going to be, their clubs are going to be around or something that you're not going to go, oh, look at that, that's a club. But I mean, we kept questioning. It's like, why are we finding these sticks wedged in the ground here? It makes absolutely no sense. I mean, we did find some footprints in that area. A lot of moose pile, scat and stuff. The moose are pretty heavy into that area. And like I said, we had found a leg bone of one down by the lake, and we were able to kind of track back up and investigate, and we found the kill site. It could have easily been wolves, because the moose was pretty scattered at that point in time. So, with the wolves up there, it kind of makes sense whether the wolves did the kill, or, whether something else did the kill.
Sure,
is kind of in question.
So Kaiju asks, has Marshall heard any vocalizations and or speech? Have you guys ever encountered anything that I mean, You had mentioned earlier, understanding your area and understanding what different predators in your area
Yeah.
will sound like when they make noise.
Yeah.
I think that's often a mistake by most people is when it comes to bobcats, mountain lions, lynx, um, you know, most of the felines, even when you start delving into the canines like wolves, coyotes, and whatnot, and fox, I think that there is people have in their mind what they recognize. What's a coyote sound like? Well, there's that one sound that they
Yeah.
attribute to it, but they don't really understand the full range of sound that that animal could make.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the lynx, you might think of that growling, grumble that they make. But when you hear that 30-second sustained moaning scream
Yeah.
that they'll make in the dark, when you hear that out in the woods, you aren't thinking in your head, "Oh, that's a lynx." You're thinking that's something 10 foot tall and it's going to kill me.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's people not being familiar with it, but even having a good understanding of what most of these animals sound like. Have you ever heard anything that you just really couldn't attribute to a natural source?
Yeah, I mean, there's been the one incident mainly that was pretty impactful to me was up here in British Columbia. It was the fall salmon run. We were over by Harrison Hot Springs, and anybody who knows a little bit about Harrison Hot Springs and some of the lore behind it, actually the First Nations in that area, I mean, their term for the big hairy creature was Sasquatch. I mean, that's not quite their pronunciation. Of course, we've done the English version of that, but that's where the stories come from. In that region, not too far from Vancouver, but if you pull up any maps in Google Earth and look in that area, it's a pretty remote, desolate country in that area. So we had a First Nations guide that my buddy and I we were fly fishing, or actually we were just at that point we weren't fly fishing, but we were fishing for the salmon that were spawning coming upstream. And we had taken the boat over to the far shore where kind of the Harrison and the Fraser meet, where the two rivers meet, and we'd been fishing there for a while. And from across the river, and these are big rivers; these aren't little streams. I mean, you need definitely a big boat to get across it. I heard this roar, and I tell people it's kind of a cross between I don't know, it's like a lion and a gorilla or something. It was this roar that I'm like, I go, wow. I said, what is that? And I looked at my First Nation guide who was fishing next to me. He dropped his rod and reel into the water and went running to his boat and grabbed his binoculars, and he's looking across the river, scanning the far side. So I'm like, what do you think it is? And he's like, oh, I don't know, maybe a wild pig. And it's like, okay, that's not how a wild pig sounds. But I mean, he was being a little cagey with it because he didn't at that time.
He doesn't want to alarm a client or somebody that he's guiding. I totally get that. I've been a hunting guide for over 2 decades. I've had it where we've had situations. I'm not talking about Sasquatch related, but I mean, situations where I'm thinking in my mind, oh, this isn't good. And when you have a client say, what's going on? I don't give them the unedited version.
Yeah.
I mean, but I understand that. But yeah, when you see him drop his rod and take off running, and then he tries to act like, it's just a pig.
Trying to downplay it. But I mean, because at that point I did start to talk to him, and I said, I've heard some really weird stuff here. I was up at another lake, during deer season up here in BC, and we had I had shot a grouse in this location. The grouses, we call them ditch chickens up here. They're really good eating little birds, and they're not the smartest. Not the sharpest tool in the shed sometimes. You yell. I think if you yell at them, they'll fall over dead.
Well, they're the kind of bird that even if you shoot at them and you miss, they tend to give you a second chance a lot of times.
Yeah, I've had them actually. I shot one over the head. It ducked its head and it kind of looked up like around, like
Yeah.
what just went over my head. So that had happened there, and basically had dressed it out and left some of the guts and stuff behind. And then we went back to where we were staying, which was about another hour, back to the lodge that we were staying at. We get back there, and Hank, the guy I was with, realized he had lost his magazine to his rifle, and he's like, okay. He goes, the only place we got out was where you shot the grouse. And so I said, well, let's go back over there. So the next day we went over there and looked, and it was really weird when we got there because we stopped in the same place, and the grouse, I'd left all the stuff on the ground, but all the feathers and the wings, you have to keep one wing, I think, but like the guts and the feathers, it was setting up on a bush that was off to the side of the road. And I didn't think much about it. I mean, it's like, okay, all of this was here, but now it's gone from here to here on a bush, like something picked it up and picked through, is there anything here I want, so it was on top of this bush. So it was strange. So I said, because that was the time when this grouse gave me a second shot, because the first one he did duck. So I thought, okay, I must be shooting high. So I took my little single shot 22-410. It was an over under that I was going to just side in and see how it was. So I walked up the road a little bit. So there's a little bit of a clearing, and I found a log I could lean up against a stump and took it's a single shot. So it's like pop, pop. And then off in the wood, I hear whack, whack. So in response to this, and I turned back to Hank and said, Hank's in his 70s, has hunted up here in BC for a long time. He just kind of shrugged his shoulders. He's like, I don't know what it was. And I'm like, that was just so weird because, I mean, there's nobody else up here. That day we saw one other person, hunter, that day. So it wasn't like there was somebody in the wood. I've had people say, oh, maybe it's just homeless people out there, hermits. And I'm like, okay, if they're hermits, they don't really want you around, don't want you to know you're there. And why are they going to knock on a tree to get your attention to make you possibly go and investigate? It's like, no, it's not a person that's up here.
Yeah, if a person didn't want to be bothered, they would just simply remain elusive. And
yeah,
you bring up a couple of interesting things that when I think of my encounter in 1987, it was up in extreme northern Manitoba on a lake, very, very remote lake. I was with two friends, and we had pulled up on an island, a small island on a lake that had a ton of islands on it, but this one was very close to the mainland. But we had pulled up on the shore because my friend's brother had to take a leak. He wasn't good at peeing out of a boat, Yeah. And we pulled up on the shoreline, and all three of us got out of the boat. We pulled it up on the beach a little bit, and my friend and his brother were both peeing right there on the beach. And I had walked up a game trail, and when I started walking up it, I thought it was weird that this game trail was so wide. It was like 3 to 4 foot wide, going uphill on this little 30-acre island. This island had a lot of high undulation on it, very forested, mostly cedar and pine, but there was some poplar and there was some birch. And as I started walking up this trail, I hear this loud crack. I mean, it was like lightning, thunder just cracked right near you. It had rained that morning, and the air was full of moisture. So any sound like that sounded amplified, you know what I mean? But I often wondered if what really I ended up having quite an experience, but what really set this thing off was maybe initially seeing these two boys peeing on its beach. We don't think of that as territorial or dominant, but almost every other animal does when it comes to establishing territory. The other thing that was interesting, it was birch. That sound was it stomping about a 5-inch round birch log that was laying down and it stomped it and broke it.
Yeah.
And when I seen it, it was holding, when by the time I had actually seen it, it's holding this across its waist, about 5 foot long, a birch log about that round.
hmm
And so, I mean, it's, I kind of look at this as it was, it probably started seeing something it didn't like, saw us coming to this island. We had often seen different animals swimming in the lake. We were there for 4 days prior to this happening. So we'd seen moose and deer and bears swimming from island to island, shoreline to island. And I kind of felt like, in retrospect now, in 30 some years I've had to think about it, it may have been using that island to hunt from. You know, if it sees a deer swimming and it actually is coming to this small island, it can position itself in a tree line. When that deer walks out of the water, it's exhausted. I mean, just walk out and break its neck. There's nothing to it. You don't have to chase it anywhere.
Yeah.
And so, you know, because it just didn't seem like that big of an island to habitate on. Obviously, it was pretty small. It was 25, 30 acres. But there's some parallels that you've shared tonight that kind of remind me of that. One being the peeing on the ground, and all of a sudden, does that really set off this? It's not curious any longer. It's agitated a little bit.
Agitated. Yeah.
And it's not going to start out running out trying to kill you. It just wants you to leave. I believe that's the main thing, is it wants you to leave.
Yeah.
So
And that's kind of what,
by breaking a log and stomping on it. And then if that doesn't work, it might show itself or do a vocalization. And if you ignore that, maybe then it throws a rock, or it starts, you know, I think it just gets ramped up a little bit. If you keep ignoring those signs, I think it has no choice but to take it to another level, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think it starts off trying to hit you with a baseball bat sized piece of wood. It doesn't start there, but.
Well, see, the thing is, we had already aggravated it because we were target practicing. So we were already making a lot of noise that it probably wasn't too happy about. Yeah. And then the point is that we come over into its come around into its territory, and now we're marking, which you know, is definitely a situation. I do talk about territories in one of the episodes, where, you know, how territorial animals can be, and how they protect those territories, and what they do to mark those territories. I mean, you know, deer are really good about that. You know, their scrapes and their rubs. I mean, they're putting out their calling card and saying, "This is my area." Yeah. You know, especially like hunting season. Hey, ladies, I'm over here. You know, it's like, you know, they don't have a bar they can go to. They just have to set up their little, you know, scrape in the wild. But
well, then you kind of factor in the whole. You have a lot of encounters when you look at a map of North America. I mean, I get where there's a lot, most of the areas where there's encounters, you have to assume they actually see a lot of humans in these areas, you know. But then you get some of these truly remote areas, and I mean really remote areas, where, you know, if you break your leg, you might crawl 20 miles and not even find a fire trail, let alone a town, you know. You kind of wonder if one sees you, if it isn't really intrigued by your interaction. I'm not saying it hasn't seen a human before, but it certainly may not see very many of them in its life.
Yeah.
There may be some bewilderment on their part.
Yeah. And I mean, that's one of the things, like I said, when you and I were talking briefly before, is that one of the approaches we're taking with our overnight treks that we're doing is we're not going out there, and nothing against people who do this approach or anything or anything like that, but we're going out as campers. You know, we're setting up our tent. You know, I usually throw up a hammock. Keegan throws up a pup tent, so if something comes in, he's the burrito, I'm the taco. So give them a choice of what they want to eat first. Yeah. I felt, for me, it's like I liked being in a hammock with a fly over it, because if I hear a noise, I can get a flashlight immediately if I'm in a tent. I have
And
to
if it
unzip
starts out at level 10, you can have the fastest escape too, you know.
yeah, that's exactly what it was. But you know, our plan is when we can get Trevor, another one of our team members, up from Vancouver, and trying to get this organized. We keep having some logistic issues. COVID really messed a bunch of stuff up. I know we're getting past that now, but we're actually bringing out you know, musical instruments and stuff. So we're going to be sitting around the campfire, making noise. What our hope is that their curiosity will get the best of them and draw them
Yeah.
in. We're not, you know, doing vocalizations, like I said, tree knocks. We're not out there looking. You know, one thing we have discussed is some passive tripwires. So
Yeah.
I made some tripwires there. Again, it's on the YouTube channel. A way to do that. It's done with a clothespin, and the tip is two thumbtacks, you know, and it's rigged up to a 9-volt battery that I bought, like these little alarms and lights that I put onto this clothespin, and then basically you open it up and you put a piece of plastic to the rope, and the minute that pulls out, then that completes your connection. Yeah, contact comes in, the light goes off, the alarm goes off. So the thing is that, you know, some people think, you know, that these creatures can sense cameras. That's why sometimes it's difficult to get a lot of stuff on them. The one camera that I did get something on was because I think it was totally surprised. It was not paying attention to where I had it placed. I had it placed in a really good area to where it was coming down the valley from a 5,000 or 6,000 foot valley down this steep ravine, and it was almost to the road, and it came out and passed in front of my camera and did a 3-frame burst. And so I've got something that got a picture of me next to the camera, and I'm about this high here, you know, but whatever it was took up the whole side of it, and it was hair, definitely not bear hair, because I hunt bear up here and know that it's not that, and it's not moose hair. It's a lot of stuff, but for the most part, the idea is that we'll probably do like a spoke, a wagon wheel of these strip lines. So if we're in a center area here, is we'll run them out in like a starburst type arrangement. And the idea being is that if something, this is our hope, we hope it doesn't come straight in for us, but there again, with predators, they circle.
Yeah. Usually it's a spiral, you know, there's some type of a circular movement because they're going to be doing a lot of different things. One, people always just assume they get downwind, right? They don't want you to smell them. They want to smell you. But I don't know that that's always the case. I've seen it to where sometimes a predator will want you to smell them as a statement, as a see how you react. And, you know, that might cause them to want to move a location 180 degrees in the opposite direction, you know?
Yeah.
And when they wander in and see your encampment and you're not posing, it sounds to me like you're really, which I love this, because this is the same approach that I took a couple of years ago in research, is that you want to leverage its curiosity. You don't want to pose yourself as any type of threat. So I'm not going to try to speak a language I don't know by making vocalizations or tree knocks, or I don't know what the sequence, what it means when I knock twice and then once, you know, I don't know that. Right.
Yeah.
And then, like you had mentioned, a lot of different narratives and opinions out there on what they can sense, but we really don't know. Can they sense battery presence? Can they look in a UV vision spectrum and see a UV coated camera lens or sunglasses or glasses? Can they notice an IR flash? There's so many things that we don't have definitive answers to, that to some extent, the approach that I took to it was I'm not going to put any of that in. If I truly want to leverage its curiosity and I don't know what it portrays as being a threat, I don't want to introduce any of that. But you know, the idea of putting audio recorders out and cameras out, I don't think that's a bad deal. It's just you placing them in the right spots and trying to get, you know, rather than putting an audio recorder in the middle of your camp, maybe you put one and triangulated 3 of them out 50 yards in each direction. That would be a higher value target of capturing something in that area watching you in the dark, because nothing's going to stand 4 feet from your fire and watch you from 10 feet away.
No.
So why put the audio device right there?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah, and that's part of the plan, is that we would deploy that. We would put it out around the perimeter, out far enough to where, like I said, hopefully they wouldn't notice it. I mean, the one camera I've had it, the one on the trail, I've had probably 4 times it's happened that, I got the camera here looking at this at the trail. When we came back to check it, the camera's been rotated off trail. So now instead of pointing on the trail, it's pushed off to where it's not capturing anything but the lake, or something there. So that I found that a little interesting. I mean, so in this same location, that we had this first wood knock encounter, the next year it was the same weekend, the May long weekend. We had another friend up with us, so there were 3 of us. We were over there again, target practicing, and came over to check the camera. And Keegan was standing down by the lake, talking to our other friend, saying, yeah, this is where we heard that weird noise. And I switched out the batteries, and I don't tend to check cameras while I'm there. I bring extra cards, put in the new card, pull out the old one, put the new one in, put new batteries in, and leave it and get out of there. Not leaving a lot of scent around. But so I go down, and the 3 of us are standing by the lake talking, in our normal voice, and then all of a sudden, off to our right side this time, it sounded like something took a huge boulder and just slammed it down. So we heard this kaboom, and we're not near a cliff, so it wasn't a rock falling off a cliff. It wasn't like a tree falling. We know what those sound like. As it falls through the bush, you'll hear it hitting other limbs and stuff. It was a hard boom, and it actually felt the ground vibrate. So there again, we're like, okay, at that point in time, we did have a shotgun with us, and Keegan was like, oh, I'll go. Yeah, okay, I don't see anything. Let's go. He got a little spooked. So we did get out of there, at that time as well. And then the next year I was hunting in that area, and I felt more secure going in. When you're going in with a deer rifle, you're hunting, so your senses are more attuned. The foliage is on the underbrush is dropped off, because this is, literally you can't see anything. It's so thick. I can't even explain how thick this is. I mean, something could walk by 10, 15 feet from you and you wouldn't see it. It's that thick. So anyway, I walked back in and was walking and investigating back on that area, and I was moose hunting. So I, did my moose call that I do. And from across the lake, I heard a very, very subtle, very, very almost, I don't know how to say it. It wasn't violent, but it was a little, whack, whack. So it was a really light wood knock, but it was more of a questioning, like a question knock, instead of whack, whack. So I thought, well, that's really weird. I mean, what is that? I mean, and then I got concerned that my moose call that I was using was actually a Sasquatch mating call, and I might be in big trouble. So I got out of there. I was recently talking to one of the old timers up there, and had talked to him about that lake, and he's always poo-pooed the idea. He says, I'll believe one when I see it. I'll believe one when I see it. And I said, well, yeah, have you ever had anything weird happen? He goes, well, yeah, but he was over by that lake where you're at. He said, my kid was like 9 or 10 years old, who's now, grown up in his, 40s or something like that. And he said, kid, we put him out on a canoe, and he was out in the middle of the lake floating around, and we were sitting over on shore. And all of a sudden, we heard a big bloop. And he said we looked out and we could see like the wake kind of finishing up. He like if something took a huge rock, threw it out in the lake, and a rock hitting water has a certain sound. It's not the same as a fish jumping.
No, it's like a depth plunge sound.
Yes,
to it.
And see, that's what he heard, and he said they didn't see anything or hear anything else other than that, but he said they saw the residual, and it was like out in the middle of this lake. And when I say lake, it's more like a big pond. I mean, it's I don't know, it's maybe a 3 or 4 acre lake, so you can walk all the way around it and stuff like that. So he had that situation there. But still, he hasn't really seen anything. And he says, I logged this area, I cut logging roads, I've been up here, and I said, yeah, but you're making a lot of noise when you're doing that. I mean, you're in a freaking logging machine, or you're running a chainsaw. I mean, if I'm anything that has any smarts about you, unless it's deaf, I mean, I'm not going to be around you. I'm going to hear where you are. I'm going to move out of the area. I mean, this same area here, I was talking to a lady who's had encounters at the other end of that valley that I was talking about, that we think they migrate through. And there's case reports along some chains of lakes that is in that valley of vocalizations and wood knocks, and actually some physical sightings. So there's a case study there for that. But she was saying that her uncle was a trapper there in the 1940s. Now, there again, this region here had no roads cut into it. If you wanted to get to this end of the lake, you had to take a ferry up, and it would drop you at the other end of the lake. The First Nations didn't really spend much time up there, but it was too rugged. There was a salmon run that was pretty substantial in its time, so there's a food source, for that. So you have fall food, and you have your other game animals for that. But there's just a lot of stuff up there. Like in that situation, she said her uncle had came across some tracks, and there again, he's a trapper, and this is in the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and somewhere in that range. I don't have ingrained in my memory what dates or what years he said it was, but he came across these tracks that basically went up and just went straight up the mountaintop. He tried to follow him, but he said he couldn't. It just got too steep, and the snow was too deep. But see, whatever it was walked up this this steep slope. And I had been in that region, but didn't really think much about it until recently. A few years back, there was a forest fire that devastated that area pretty heavily, and went in there after the fires. And you could see up in the cliff tops, there appeared to be caves up in there. So way up there, you couldn't see it before because of all the forest, but since it had burnt, you could actually see potential areas. We're planning on hopefully this weekend, we're going to get our drone up there and see if we can fly up to any of those caves and see if there's any possible habitation up in that area. But so there's been reports that go, there again, way back there.
Yeah.
And that was before roads. I mean, the first road, I think, was cut into that area in the 70s. And there again, it's a Forest Service road, that a lot of loggers up there. In that same area too, one of our neighbors' grandson, who's a hunter and has been a guide, and has spent, even though he's in his 20s, he spent a lot of time in the woods and knows what's going on. He was taking the snowmobile up, and he was going up the valley, and stopped, and he was doing some wolf calling for wolves, see if he can get them to reply. And so he had his little electronic thing going, and he said he turned it on, and like within 15-20 seconds, something up the hill above him started making this god awful noise. He said it sounded like tree branches breaking and rocks being thrown around. And so he thought, okay, the wolves are coming down. The wolves are coming down now, So he shut off the wolf call and was getting ready to see if they were going to, come down and get on the road. And the sound stopped. So he said he sat there for about 5 minutes. And there again, I need to reiterate, fresh snowmobile coming in. Nobody else had been up there.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like there was someone up there. There's not. So he turned on the call again, and it started back up. The same noise, the same thing was going on. So he shut it off, and he's like, "What the heck is this? It just makes no sense." So he's like, I recorded the call just after he got back to the cabin. He called me via satellite connection, because this is a very off-grid area, but there are people who have now Starlink up there. If you have some power, you can get out and communicate. But so yeah, he gave me a call and relayed it to that. So it's in one of my pieces there where we talk about it. He gives the account, but there's a lot of bleeping going on because he likes the colorful language he was using. And he actually, that night in the cabin, he slept with his gun next to him, which there again, this is a guy that I've seen walk up to a tree with a bear in it and take a selfie.
Yeah.
He's not afraid. But this really got him spooked. So at that point, he turned on the pack option on his call, and he let it go and turned it full volume up, just blasted it. He said when he did that, suddenly down below him in the river bottom, he saw this tree start shaking back and forth like this, and the sound started up top again. So obviously he was between two areas. Couple things.
I think that any Sasquatch in that area, if they are together in a clan, so to speak, working together, when they hear a pack of wolves, I think they'll all go, ape shit, basically. Because, if you think about what is the true threat to a Sasquatch, I mean, I think that when it comes to brown bears and grizzly bears, I think those bears look at a Sasquatch, and Sasquatch look at bears and say, "I'm going to respect you. You respect me." I mean, they aren't. I don't think they get in territorial battles that often. Not saying they couldn't, but just wouldn't make sense. When you look at mountain lions and different things, I think the true threat to a Sasquatch would be a pack of wolves, because it does not matter how fast you are, how big you are, how much brute strength you have. When you start talking 15 or 20, 120 to 150 pound wolves coming at you in a pack mentality, I don't know how you would defend against that. It isn't one threat. It is a surrounding threat that is always evolving. No matter where you move, they adjust to it. And I would think that they would really look at that a pack of wolves as something to be really concerned about.
Yeah, and that's what it seemed like. They were making all the noise, threatening, basically, just like, "Hey, we're here." And canines are, I mean, they're freaking smart. I mean, we think our dogs are great for doing tricks, but you get a pack of wolves out there, and the way they communicate and how they do it is just beyond me. I've been stalked by cougars before, hackles up, and I knew it was there, but a wolf pack, I've had friends who were surrounded by a pack of wolves, actually, believe it or not, in Southern California, and they had to defend themselves. There was, because they were going through a pinch point, basically, and when the two wolves walked out in the path, right, blocking their path, and they turned around, and the two came in from the other end behind them, and then the ones they saw on the side, I mean, they had to defend themselves.
Well, when you look at, when it comes to like mountain lions, 99 out of 100 times the mountain lion's scared senseless of humans. Okay. But they will have that natural pursuit mode triggered by a jogger or by a biker, or it's just like dragging a feather on a string past a
Yep.
domestic cat. They can be dead asleep on the living room floor, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa,
Yep.
and they get in a trance that's hard to break. So when you see these people that have videoed a mountain lion following them up a trail and they're throwing rocks and they're yelling at it, it's like this thing's just hypnotized, like it can't stop walking at them. That pursuit mode is very hard to break. So when it comes to mountain lions, if you are attacked by one, they don't, it isn't like black bears. They don't say, hey, talk calmly and walk backwards, don't break eye contact thing. No, it's get as big as you can, get as loud as you can.
Yeah.
And it's that way with wolves too. There's no laying down. If you don't hear of that many instances where people are killed by wolves. There really aren't that many. But the amount of times that people are attacked by them and have to defend themselves against them, it does not require putting your hands up and talking in a calm voice. You have to go completely ape shit on a pack of wolves to get it to stop.
Yeah, that's the whole flight, and you have to fight.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting when people are playing recordings. I do a lot of coyote hunting, and I'll play wounded rabbit calls and stuff. I've been, like you said, I've been out moose hunting before and been on a birch bark call in a very remote area, and you do that big old howl on that call, and afterwards, immediately I'm thinking, would a brown bear perceive this as like a dinner bell? You know what I mean? It's like you start really thinking about it. It's not just the moose that heard this right now, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, that's the thing too. Yeah.
It's interesting that we think we look at something and we see it from our human aspect and predict, well, this is what's going to happen or this is what's likely to happen. But we aren't really looking at through the eyes of a moose or a brown bear or a wolf or a Sasquatch. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
that's what you have to do. I mean, with anything, you have to understand your prey. And I'm going to use that just in the hunting term. I'm not saying we're out there, hunting for Bigfoot, which
sure.
not. But you say any apex predator, how do they react? I mean, if there's people who make their whole career studying human psychology, the human psyche and how we think and how we, things that we go through and stuff. But with anything, there's definitely, a thought process that you should look at and evaluate. And that's, like I said, that's why we created so many of these, educational kind of episodes.
Sure. It's hard. It's hard for a lot of people to, when you start looking at, well, how would a Sasquatch react to this, or what would a likely response be, or what would it consider a threat? What wouldn't it consider a threat? There's so much speculation involved in that, but some of that, when you really start looking at what's the most plausible explanation of how it would be perceived, I don't think that it's hard to, at least apply some common sense to it and come up with, a lot of times it leads me to come up with a little bit different approach. And I'm not saying we're reinventing the wheel with what other researchers are doing, but maybe we're just moving it 10 degrees over, just a little bit different angle to it. And because I'm not a big fan of, I jokingly will say that when I hear people go out and start making vocalizations, it's like walking up to Jackie Chan and faking Chinese, wondering if you just challenge him to an ass kicking contest. I mean, I don't want to do that, right? Accidentally. Yeah. So I like the approach that you're taking with your friends. One thing I am kind of curious about when we're talking about wood knocks, I've heard quieter wood knocks too, like the subtleness of it.
Subtle, yeah.
Kind of an inquisitive. It's not being put out there like, listen to me, right? And I don't know if that's them trying to communicate with another one about its situational rep, or it's what it's observing or what its status is, and just doing it on a quieter level because it knows it's not very far away. If they knew that they were within a quarter mile of each other, would they really crank that thing against a tree?
Yeah.
So I don't know, or I don't know if it's them subtly doing it so that we hear it. I have heard wood knocks on Blaine Highcheck's recordings where you can tell one's far away and one was really close. But then all of a sudden you could hear one that you could tell this thing was close, but it wasn't loud. It wasn't like cracking against this tree. It was just like, it was just letting another one know that wasn't very far away. I'm here now.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't want to make the mistake of thinking it's all about us. What is it telling us? Maybe they're just communicating with each other and saying, hey, I'm not where I was. I'm positioned here now. Or this thing that I'm watching is moving, or whatever they're communicating to each other. But they know that they're close enough to each other that doesn't require some full blast crack on a tree. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
That's exactly. I mean, when I was up there, like I said, moose hunting, it was more, it just, to me, I don't know, it was like more of it was just letting inquiry, like I said, I had been quiet coming in there, and I do the moose call, would Sasquatch do moose calls if they're trying to, would they do a call, trying to lure in prey like that? I mean, like I said, maybe my call was good, maybe it was bad, I don't know. But it was almost, like I said, it was more like, hey, I'm over here. And it wasn't an angry thing. It was more, like I said, I felt, I mean, I have spidey senses and I have stuff, but it felt to me, it was more of an inquiry.
It kind of makes me wonder if, we talk about them wanting to express their curiosity, and we talk about us trying to leverage that curiosity by not posing ourselves as a threat. When it's trying to gauge how much attention are you paying here, right? I mean, which to some degree, it has to be trying to analyze that. It hears you playing on a harmonica, or it hears you talking to friends around a fire. It might take some luxury in feeling that you're not really focused on, did I hear something in the trees, right?
Yeah.
But when it taps lightly on a tree, I wonder if it's not trying to say, hey, hear this. If maybe it's trying to do that and watch you and see, did you notice that? Are you paying attention? Because if you don't turn your head like, what was that, when it's just a light little knock, maybe that kind of validates its feeling of comfortability with being there. He didn't hear me knock really lightly, therefore I'm not too worried right now.
Yeah.
It's just interesting, all the different things it could mean, really.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I said, and I don't pretend to know it all, but it was just one of those things that just the sense that I got, it wasn't an anger sense. It was just like, hey, I'm here. I mean, that's what it felt like it was trying to say to me, or whatever the communication, because, people say, oh, it was a a woodpecker. And it's like, I mean, yes, there was a woodpecker that had been around and I'd heard him, when I was in there, and he was, I mean, the sound of a woodpecker, but this was not that type of sound.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard enough of them and know enough, but yeah, no, there's there's just a lot of stuff, and whether we end up getting video recording or video footage of this or not, I mean, that's hard to say. Trev, who's part of our team, is a skeptic. He's ex-Canadian Navy SEAL. So he's tough as nails. He spent a lot of time training in the woods of Canada, and when they go in, and he said, he just doesn't, he thinks there's a logical reason for it, anything that people have seen. So he's kind of our skeptic, and there again, Keegan's had incidents over the years too that kind of makes him wonder about it. I mean, the area we're in. I mean, there are grizzly bears known to be in that area too, so we do always have protection with us when we're up in that area as well. Further up the valley, I've gotten trail cameras that have wolverines on it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're pulling wolverines and stuff like that, you got to understand it's a remote area.
Yeah.
I had one trail that was pointed at the road just to see how much traffic, and in a 2-month period of time, there were 3 vehicles that went by. So it gives you an idea how remote this is and how
I've got a few remote areas in northern Minnesota, but also some remote areas up in Manitoba that I put year-round cameras in and go in 3 times a year and pull the cards, change the batteries, and let them buck again. And it's crazy how even in the Flin Flon area of Manitoba, Saskatchewan border, a lot of lakes, a lot of really remote woods there.
Yep.
I mean, it's a really logging communities that are abandoned and aren't really that active anymore. And but I'll get videos and depending on the camera. I mean, some of these cameras are a little bit older, a couple years older. I'm better off just using for stills, but some of them take really good video, and they go through batteries faster when you do that, but I like setting them up to do it. But I've got images of, I mean, it's just so crazy how diverse it is, from mink and fishers and, like you say, wolverines to known big game animals that you would expect, lynx, I see lynx, mountain lion, elk, even kind of the northern fringes of elk country. There's some caribou that you'll see depending on where your cameras are, but a lot of mule deer, and some whitetail. I mean, it's so diverse how much activity you see there.
Yeah, and I mean, this is probably not, you can't see it too well here, but this is one of the things here. This is where I go into the camera, and then this is whatever had passed by. So you see, I'm about 5'6", and I'm standing down. I'm looking down because it's uneven terrain, and whatever that is went by, and then it shot 3 frames. The center one was blank, and then in the last one, there's just this little bit of hair up here, just a small amount. So it's something that I can't quite explain. If I take the screen a little darker, you might be able to see it there a little bit better. It's not bear, it's not moose hair, because I've done some investigating to see what could it be. And believe it or not, the closest thing texture-wise that I was able to find was something that was from a primate, from a photo I'd taken when I was at the Singapore Zoo of some of the different primates, and it was so creepy, like there's the monkey in the tree, and I zoomed in, and then this little section, this one right here is what its hair looks like zoomed in. And then the big image I have up there is the crop off of whatever's on the camera. Now, tell me that those don't match.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I mean, so there again, I try to analyze and do a lot of research, and in a situation like that, it was just like, okay, this can't describe it, can't figure it out. As far as that camera, there again, saw two vehicles had been on that road in the course of 3 months. So, not people up there. There's not a lot of stuff around.
Yeah, I talk a lot about, remoteness. It's so relative compared to what somebody's threshold of reference is. I talk to people that will say, "Oh, we were in a remote area. We parked their car and walked back like 3 miles, and we were in a really remote area, and I'm thinking, well, you were there and your car was 3 miles away. I mean, I'm not saying it's likely that other humans go there often, but your reference to remote and my reference to remote are
Yeah.
two different things, really. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm not trying to, belittle somebody's representation of feeling remote. I'm just saying that when you end up in, off the grid in northern Idaho, or you get way out in Saskatchewan, or back up in the backside of passes in BC and stuff, to where, you don't see mountain bikers. You don't, even in the winter, you typically don't see snowmobilers in many of these areas. And they're not areas that are impossible to put yourself into.
Yeah.
If you want to be in a remote area that you are not likely to see other humans. I mean, you can easily do it, but when I'm guiding hunters and we have to go on horseback for 3 days just to get to the backside of a pass to hunt.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm looking through a spotting scope across a whole valley and see another human being, I'm surprised. I mean, like, wow, there's actually somebody over there.
Yeah.
It's almost a mile away, and there's a person. Wow. But
Yeah. See, that's the thing, because like here's a little indicator where the red is like where the camera was, and then it came down off of this mountain up here.
Oh yeah.
So you get an idea that it's I mean, yeah, people are up there. There's loggers that go through there too, but like I said, based upon even these cameras I put up that captures occasional vehicles, not a whole lot of people up there. I mean, because to get to my place alone, it takes some time. In a 4-wheel drive vehicle.
Yeah.
Some of these other places I go there, I'm another hour up the valley from where I'm at, and we have the last private property in this valley until you get up to the head of it. And there's just a lot of areas up there. Let's just say this way, I really don't want to break down up there and have to walk back.
I often I get what you're saying. I mean, there are some people who don't go through that type of foresight. They just don't think, what's the worst case scenario that could happen? Geez, I don't want to break down out there. That doesn't occur to them until they're broke down. They'll look at their car and say, man, I haven't had to do anything to this car for a year. I can't believe it's broke down. Yeah. But,
yeah. But even there with like I said, a friend of ours who had the wolf incident in the snow. I mean, when that happened, that last one, that just when the tree started shaking down below him, he immediately he just jumped on the snowmobile, started up and started heading up the road, and he's going along. He's like, oh wow, that was weird. But then he realized that, wait a minute, I've got to go back through that area, and it's getting dark. So he immediately turned around and zoomed back through there to get back to his cabin, because he's like, he knew that he was going to be caught on the wrong side of the vocalizations.
And there is a lot of there's a lot of things that you look at differently when you're traveling on a snowmobile. I suppose on an ATV too, but especially in the winter, when conditions are deadly. I mean, you break down a snowmobile, how long you got, right?
Yeah.
With hypothermia and stuff. A little bit different than, fall or summer on a 4-wheeler. But I've been in areas of Wyoming, like Laramie, Wyoming, back in the Medicine Bowl areas and stuff, on a snowmobile, where I had was by myself. I got kind of separated from the 3 or 4 guys I was with, and was watching a mountain lion. I was stuck getting I had went up and tried to hairpin out of a kind of a steep area that was full of powder, and I got buried, and I was trying to pull my track around about 90 degrees, and I knew I could get out, But I'm watching this mountain lion on the other side of this meadow walking towards me. And I mean, I don't hear other snowmobiles. I don't see anything, right? I mean, it's just a lone feeling. And I'm just sitting there quickly trying to get the snowmobile turned around, get it started up, and I rev it up. And this thing just doesn't even break stride. It keeps walking. It's like it's just intrigued, right?
Yeah.
And but when I started looking at my gas gauge, I had just under half of a tank, and I'm thinking, okay, I had to go through a pass to get to the backside of this. And once I got back here, I was at half a tank. I don't have time to mess around for 15, 20 miles before I start going back. Otherwise, I'm not going to get back, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I think when people are on snowmobiles and they start analyzing what's the best approach, what's the most efficient way to survive this situation, unfortunately, you are factoring in gas and time and, you know, what do you have that in that resource? And I see that a lot, especially I've been out guiding hunters in Montana where I have ran into people who were there for a day and a half, just SOL, because they had a side by side that broke down and they were far enough in there, they weren't getting out, you know, and they didn't have a signal on a phone. They didn't have a satellite phone. I mean, they didn't tell somebody, hey, if we're not back by Tuesday at noon, make sure you call somebody. I mean, there's a lot of steps you can take to be safe, and they hadn't taken any, you know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
yeah, there's a lot of stuff you have to do. I mean, there again, it's just simple stuff. I mean, I watched the TV series Alone. You know, like
I love that show.
Watch
now
that
the
show.
News started, so the new season starts, and my Thursday nights are booked.
Yeah, yeah. So and there again, it was just like the 100 gets turned around, and I mean, like, you know, as any outdoorsman, as you're walking forward, you need to every few steps you stop and you look behind you, because you need to know where you're going to return, because when you go this way, it looks normal, like I said, but when you turn around, you don't recognize it unless you turn around.
Yeah. I was going to answer Quint's question here. He says, where are you a guide? I guide all over North America and out of country. Most of my guiding is mule deer hunters and pheasant hunters on my family's property in the Pierce, South Dakota area. But I do guide mountain lion hunters and mule deer hunters in the Black Hills of South Dakota. And I guide deer hunters and elk hunters in Wyoming, Montana, southern Manitoba, southern Saskatchewan, and I'll do a little bit of black bear guiding in northern Minnesota. I don't really enjoy it just because it takes a lot of work to be successful at that. And unfortunately, I think people buy a tag and go out and think, oh, I'll hire somebody that way, it's guaranteed to fill it. You got to know what you're doing to be able to fill a bear tag. And unfortunately, a lot of people really don't come equipped, ready to go through that type of stuff. So I don't do that too often, but yeah, I'd love to hear, Quint, where you do some guiding. I mean, I'm a part of a network where there's almost 100 guides in it, but there's about a dozen of them I'm really close to, where if they have somebody that they guide pig hunting in Texas, down hog hunting, and they say, hey, we want to go hunt pheasants in South Dakota, they'll recommend me to them, and vice versa. I'll recommend them to clients. And obviously, if Quint's a guide, he knows how about 90% of our business is referral amongst each other. So, but yeah. So what do you guys got anything on your near schedule coming up this summer as far as
well, we're probably going to have to look at the fall, because what happens this time of year, and there again, this is me making observations. I'm sure, Jeff, if your region is the same way, but this time of year is mosquito heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Mosquitoes are really bad. The moose actually during this time of year migrate to the top of the mountains, which we got mountains that are 5,000 or 6,000 feet. So they migrate up where it's cooler and there's less mosquitoes to get away from them. So that's part of what I'm thinking right now, is that if there's, Sasquatch up in still, right in our area at the moment, that they're up higher. They're up at the higher elevations to get away from these bugs. So mainly what that leaves us is, the spring when they're coming in, but also the fall whenever the salmon start to come in. So we're going to try to look a little bit more this fall and see. Hopefully we can coordinate something for one of the holidays, the long weekends up here, and we'll kind of get set up. The mosquitoes start dying down a little bit in August, September, and stuff like that, and we're always looking when we're up there. I'm going to go again up this weekend, and I'm going to pull some cards and put in some new batteries, so I'll have a fresh batch of stuff to look at and see if we've gotten lucky and captured anything.
And then that's when the real work starts. I'll go out and pull 26 SD cards, and it's like, okay, I got a total of like 44,350 pictures and videos I got to look through now.
I know. It's just like I sit there and I just go next.
You kind of get into a mode. It's hard to explain to people, but the first hour, let's say you started at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night. The first hour you do it is tedious. But somehow your mind gets into the subconscious mode to where you're just clicking away, and you're like, man, what time is it? And it's like, whoa, 4 hours just went by. Yeah. What happened?
But the thing about that's good is because you're going frame by frame. So that's where I've actually been able to see something that was very, very interesting, because the background changed. So like, wait, something moved. So by going through that type of stuff, kind of quickly, you can see, you see the normal time lapses, but then suddenly you'll see something that's out of the norm, out of the ordinary. And then that's where you back up, because if you just looked at it, looked at the image, you probably wouldn't see something. You might not notice it, but when you do a comparison like that, that's where you really know that something's, something's there that shouldn't be there, maybe, or wasn't there.
Yeah, no, I agree. You see, a lot of times what really catches me too is, the insects. You'll be flying through 20 pictures in a row, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what was that? And you go back 2 pictures, and here's this dragonfly looking. I mean, I've captured some insects I look at and say, that literally looks like a fairy. I mean, I've seen some insects. I'm not deep into the the whole woo thing, but I've both me and Doug Highcheck have both looked at images and been like, dude, tell me that's not a fairy right there, because I mean, what do you have? Unfortunately, when you have an image like that, that's all you have. That snapshot in time. It's not like we can go out there and double check it, right?
No,
it's gone. So yeah, but yeah, it's crazy some of the stuff that you'll see on pictures, and it's crazy some of the things that you'll see just normal animals doing on. I mean the behavior that you'll see something eating something and think, what?
Totally.
Didn't know that would eat that.
Totally, yeah. Because see, that was that one image that I was talking about that I don't really know. I mean, maybe it's the butt end of a deer.
Yeah.
But at that height up, and it just doesn't make much sense. Yeah, and when I compared either side, I didn't see a change in the snow. So, who knows what it is? I just strike it up as one of those curiosity things. Don't know what it is. But
yeah, but you know what? It's when you're going through 10,000 pictures, I'll tell you what, you might go through 3,000 in a row and you haven't seen anything interesting.
Yeah.
But when you find one and you're like, wow, what is that? That will fuel you for the next 10,000 pictures. Yeah. I mean, it is crazy how, I don't want to say rewarding, but it's a lot of work to go out there and do that type of stuff. Hang those cameras, replace those SD cards, go out and replace batteries. Some of these cameras are really hard to access where I've got them located. It's not convenient. And to be able to find a picture and say, wow, even if it's a natural, known wildlife doing something different, I've caught a litter of lynx kittens before. And there's like 5 of them all in the same picture. It's like, dude, this is the most coolest picture I've ever seen, right? It makes it feel like it was worth it, the 6 hours you spent freezing your ass off trying to get to those cameras and get the cards a week before. So, but yeah, I was just reading what somebody had.
Yeah, I just see in the comments someone was talking about Harrison. Look like
I had read that earlier. I didn't put it up.
Yeah.
You familiar with that area?
Yeah, that's Harrison. That's the area that I heard the vocalization on.
Yeah.
And actually, I've got a First Nations friend who we just haven't coordinated yet. He says he's got a friend there. He says I will 100% guarantee I can take you in and you will see a Sasquatch. He said you might not want to see it, and after you've seen it, he says maybe you wish that you wouldn't have, but he says he guarantees that he'll do that. So I got to talk to him, and I'm going to talk to him and see if this fall is the time to do it. But he says, they know an area that you can go in and you will see one. But I don't know. We'll see. Yeah, over by it's. I don't think it's on that side where Sasquatch Park is. I think it's over on the. My understanding is most of the activity, I could be wrong, is on the West Harrison roads. I've gone up the East Harrison a ways. But somebody said more it's the West Harrison Forest Service roads is kind of an activity area. And yeah, so we'll see. I mean, if that happens, yeah, I've been over in the Golden Ears area. Yeah, that is some very interesting country over that way, especially if you fly in to Vancouver coming over those mountains. I mean, here's a lower mainland that has 5 million people, and within 20 to 30 minutes you can be out into really rugged areas. So but like I said, we'll see. I'm gonna have to take my buddy up on this, and it's like, okay, well, guarantee it's not someone in a suit, because I'm gonna be able to know if it's a suit,
Yep. Come prepared, right?
Yeah.
Do you know Thomas Steenberg?
I don't.
He's up in your neck of the woods. I'll put you in touch with him, because I think Thomas is a very realistic approach to this. He's been doing this since the beginning. I mean, he was into doing the investigations back when the Four Horsemen were kind of the talk about, so to speak. He knew all of them, maintained relationships with most of them. But he has done more investigations on actual encounters in your area than anybody that I know of. I mean, it really, and I'm talking about since you used to write it out and put it in a metal filing cabinet, not the file on your computer, but yeah, he's a fun person to visit with, and I think that your approach to the subject, he would see a lot of value in, and would love to communicate with you.
Yeah, and like I said, the thing for me is just like, I don't run around, screaming to the top of my lungs, it's Bigfoot, it's Sasquatch, it's Sasquatch. It's like I'm from Missouri. I'm in the Show Me State. You got to prove it to me. So I'm really trying to prove it to myself more than anything. I mean, the question comes up. I've been asked. It's like, hey, if you discover one and you get recording footage, do you really want to share it? I mean, because and it's like, I hadn't really thought about that. It's like, well, that's an interesting subject, because
Yeah, I've wrestled with that too. I mean, what good and what bad comes from it? Its
Yeah.
discovery leads to 1,000 more questions, um, depending on what slot it fits to and how closely related to humans it is. Now you start talking about, what does it have a right to? What does it
Yeah.
have? What concessions should we make towards its existence? You kind of wonder if it's done a pretty damn good job since PG filmed it to now at being elusive. I mean, does it
Yeah.
need our help really? I don't
I
know.
know. I mean, and
Um,
even speaking of that, I was actually fishing up on the Trinity River up in the Trinity Alps, um, and we were up there at a fish camp, and I had to go out to the vehicle at night to get something, and there again, my hairs went up on the back of my neck.
mhm.
I had a huge one of those million power candles, flashlights that I shined around, but something was there, something was watching me. And it wasn't until later that I figured out we were within like 30 miles of where that was filmed.
Hmm.
I mean, up in that area. Um, it is there again. It's some desolate areas, and um, I had gotten somehow I got up on one of the Forest Service roads up in there, and there again, it's like didn't see another soul the whole time. I mean, there's like I said, there's a lot of these areas that people just don't know about. I mean, when I
Yeah,
go
yeah.
to Google Earth, and I actually do a lot of my preliminary research looking at Google Earth, and finding those areas, like you said, pinch points. That's what took me to this lake area to begin with, to start doing the research there. Um, Part of me says, maybe we get a little inflatable raft and we float out and camp on the lake in the middle of the night and see what happens there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But
It's interesting when you really think about, when you, like, for me, my encounter was in 1987. I was 18 years old, and it took a long time. I mean, I'm trying to do the math here. It's too much math to do almost. But, a year and a half ago, I spent an awful lot of time working a clearing, accessing a remote clearing in the Pine Island Forest of Minnesota, northern Minnesota. That was off the grid. I mean, didn't see humans even in the in the touristy seasons. Nobody was getting back to this area, and it seemed like I was having interaction in this area almost weekly, and so I kept focusing on that. And a lot of people will say, "Well, geez, it's so weird that you just snowmobiled back there, found 7 different clearings on one forest and one river system, and investigating those clearings, you found an area that Sasquatch was." What you're not figuring in is, in the last 20 years, I've probably spent 500 days and nights literally in truly remote areas guiding hunters way off grid, and
yeah,
never had an experience. Never
yeah,
heard a vocalization, never saw one through a spotting scope. And I mean, I'm in these areas with a peripheral a mile wide, looking for, whether it's moose, whether it's elk, whatever I'm there to look for. But, mostly I'm looking for other humans. To me, that's the biggest threat out in the woods, is another human. And
exactly.
so I would think that, if there was a Sasquatch making a vocalization like you had mentioned earlier that doesn't fit that natural library of sound I have in my reference, it's going to stand out. 500 days and nights, never heard of it, never seen anything. And so when I hear people say, well, we're going to go out this weekend, and then they come back on Monday and say, we had this one come in Friday night, this one came in Saturday. I'm just like, dude,
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah,
saying, I don't want to tell somebody you're lying, because I don't believe that. But it's hard for me to sign on to that, thinking about how much time I spend in those areas and got zeros. You
yeah.
know, it shouldn't be easy to go out
It's
and
not.
and
No.
and find one and have it actually interact with you. Um, so it's I don't want to say I throw up red flags, but I'm a little guarded when I hear people say, hey, 10 of us are going to go out this weekend. Then they come back Monday and say, we had these rocks thrown at us. We got these audio. It's like, dude, this isn't a, hey, Sasquatch, I'll meet you at 10 o'clock Friday night. Make sure you're there kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's why with us, like I said, that's why it's a trek, because it's a long and arduous journey. I mean, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to come easy. You know, and we're trying to approach it and really be logical about it. You know, how you know what's going on. I mean, we're hopefully not let our imaginations get in the way. But I mean, that's kind of like why we have Trev. He's the one who's going to call bullshit on us if we.
Yeah. Well, I honestly, when I do a lot of the research stuff where I'm actually trying to put myself in an area to look for data, I prefer doing that by myself. But if I'm going to go with somebody else, I really do like being with a skeptic. And if I'm not, I want to be with somebody who knows how to communicate properly. I know I was talking about this with a couple other my guests I've had on in the past. If if the two of us are walking down a trail and I hear something, I don't want to say, did you hear that knock? Did you hear that? I'll just say, did you hear that? I want you to tell me what you heard. I want to see if it matches what I thought I heard. You know what I mean? I don't want to load it into your head and say, did you hear that whistle followed by a light knock? You know, what's the point of that? The power of suggestion, you could get half the people you go into the woods to say, I think I did hear that, you know?
Yeah.
So,
well, that's why with Hank, when I was there, I just turned around and looked at him, and Hank shrugged his shoulders because he's like, I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
You know, nobody kind of knows what it was, but.
Well, I'd like to have you back sometime, and if Hank's willing to come back, I mean, I would hope that he would understand. I do not hold that opinion that because something happened, because something hasn't happened to me in my life's experience doesn't mean it couldn't happen to them. So I don't like throwing that red flag at people, but also when it comes to being a skeptic, I have to apply the scientific method to all the data that I uncover, which means if I draw a hypothesis based on something and say, I think this is the most plausible explanation of what I'm looking at here, I now have committed myself to work with the same diligence to disprove that theory as I am to prove it.
Yeah.
I can't approach it biasly. And so I really feel like when conversations I have with skeptics, that they're probably pretty comfortable with them because that's the way I'm going to approach it, you know, is I'll go where the data leads me. And if it doesn't lead me anywhere, I'm not going to make up some place to go.
See, that's
you know?
it. Yeah. Yeah, you can't. That's what you have to do. You just, basically you put the facts down. I mean, even in one of the little episodes there, I don't remember if it was the camouflage episode or the sensory perception one, but I think it might have been the camouflage. Is I actually did a little setup. So I had my camera set up. I had my camo on. I went into the woods in front of my camera. My wife directed me into a couple of positions. She was like, "Move, okay, stay right there," and then I would move around. So it's like the ending of Harry and the Hendersons, where you see him and he moves away, and then suddenly they're there and they're moving. So I recreated that by doing there again, like what I do, a digital composite. But yeah, I'm there and suddenly I move. And then you see me, and then I move here, and then you see me. But if you looked at that image, if you looked hard, you maybe see me in a couple spots, but all of the spots I was in, some of them, like I said, with the camo, my wife was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't see you." She said, "You're standing right there, but I can't see you. You're invisible." And I'm like, exactly. Because as humans, what we're taught is to look for movement, specifically horizontal movement through the forest. It's that horizontal movement that is basically the fight or flight. That's what our eyes, kind of deal with. That's how we notice stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, who knows?
Well, when I was in the military, I was stationed at Fort Benning, and eventually worked at the airborne school and was stationed with the 82nd. But I had some friends of mine in the 1st of the 75th and 2nd and 75th Ranger Battalion there at Fort Benning where I was stationed. And some of them had been in for, 10, 11, 12 years. And you watch some of those guys move through the woods. It really isn't about what they're wearing. It's such subtle things that make them so undetectable. The how still they can be for that long, or how they can actually move, but they're moving in a way that presents their peripheral or their their silhouette from your angle. You start realizing how they look at where that person is and the way that they'll put their body like this or something just because that's the shape where the tree is. And you're looking at that tree going, dude, I don't see anything, right?
Yeah.
They're not just standing behind a tree. I mean, it is crazy how these guys can move. And not just that, but the way they move over deadfall. I don't hear twigs clacking and stuff. I mean, they have just done it so good or for so long that they're that good at that. And I think a lot of people, including myself, when I had my first encounter, I really wrestled with how did it get from where I heard it and where I thought it would be. How did it get from A to B, which is like 40 yards without making any noise? There was no wind. There was no, I could hear you snap your finger from 100 feet away. I didn't get how it could move. But then I started thinking, when I start looking at some of these guys in those units that can move the way they do, for something that lives 24 hours a day, decade after decade out in the woods, it's possible that it could get so good at something that I just can't wrap my brain around that.
Yeah.
If I spend 20, 30, 40 days a year out off grid somewhere, hunting or fishing or whatever, camping, do I really get what it would be like where my survival depends on my elusivity and ability to move without making noise, and how good I may get at that after 20 years? I just don't know if we really get how good it could be at something like that, I guess is my point.
Yeah. I know. Well, like I said, the thing is that, there's a lot of people out there, a lot of eyes out there, and, people, they say, why haven't we found bodies? I do talk about that in one of the episodes, the time lapse. Basically bodies don't last that long. They're scattered and they're gone.
Yeah.
A deer was hit on the Forest Service road. My neighbor told me about it on Saturday. She said, there was a deer hit there right in the middle of the road. And on the way back down on coming, back to my place in town on Sunday, around the bend, and a bunch of ravens take off. So it's like I pull over and look, and sure enough, there's the deer carcass over the side of the road, what's left of it, and already it was being picked clean really quick.
Yeah.
So stuff doesn't last. But
no, it really doesn't. I think that's something that people, a lot of times people will speculate or will apply some skepticism to that. Well, how come they never find bones? How come I think there's a lot of different explanations that could play into that, but there's definitely one that does, and that's the rate of deterioration on the forest floor. I don't think people really get that.
They do not. For me, just to give you an idea, in my remote cabin up there is like, I will put my strap out, of course, before I leave. I've came back, the next weekend, and the mouse is just hair and bones, because there's house flies and the maggots got to it, and within a week time, it's nothing is really left of it.
Yeah, I had archery hunting one time. I shot a pretty nice white-tailed deer in a pretty heavily forested area that was a little bit off grid, and it was getting dark. I shot it the last 5 minutes of legal shooting light and gave it a half an hour, and I was going to trek back there. I called one of my friends. He came out on a side-by-side to the area that I was at. And we were getting ready to go out and look for this and see if we could pick up a blood trail. And we heard a pack of coyotes, and they were going crazy. And we listened to them for about a half an hour. It sounded like they were exactly where I saw this deer walk to. And he says, let's just go out in the morning. He says, they aren't going to eat the horns. He joked. And we went out in the morning, and he was like, well, shit, maybe they did eat the horns. I mean, yeah, I've seen dogs eat antlers. It's possible. I mean, I don't think there's anything on an animal that can withstand the forest floor over even a fairly short amount of time. So,
yeah, no, it doesn't take any time. I mean, that's kind of what's happening. Nature's just meant to be that way. Reuse and reuse, or whatever it is. Yeah, basically ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Everything. It's food.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, I appreciate you coming on tonight, Marshall. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I would love to have you and both your partners back sometime if they want to come back.
Yeah, I can talk to them, and we can do especially if after we get our first. I mean, we've done preliminary treks and stuff like that. There again, no contact at that point in time. But
well, if we wait a couple months here, maybe what we could do is we'll get some prep into this to where if you want to share some of the pictures that you've ended up with and things, not saying this is what it is, but just saying, boy, here's a question mark for you to look at. I think
definitely that
fun.
type of stuff. Yeah. And like I said, if you look at the Quatch Trek, the videos there, since I'm, basically I've done all the research, narration, writing, the editing, a lot of my own photography in there, a bunch of other stuff. So it does have, I consider high production value, and it does let you look at stuff.
Yeah.
Because we do show, like, under there, there's an episode called the first Trek prints you can see, and we talk about also legendary mythos and how legend fills a lot of things. And but yeah, I encourage people just to look at those, and we'll
What I'll do is that after we're done with the show here, I'm gonna be uploading it to all the podcast platforms, but I'll go back into the description of this episode here on YouTube, and I'll put in the description the link to your Quatch Trek YouTube channel so people can go check it out. So
yeah, well, that would be great. I really appreciate that.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Marshall. I will stay in touch with you, and thank you again so much for coming.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening. Take care. Thanks.
Yep. Well, that was a fun show. I really enjoyed visiting with him. I'd love to visit with him again. I feel like he's got a lot more stories to talk about that he hasn't shared. And I think it would be fun to get the viewpoint of Hank, or if I think that's what his name was, his member of his team that's kind of takes the skeptic approach. I would love that. I mean, I don't want to create any tension. I just think it's great for somebody like that to say, here's the things that I look at and consider when I see this. I think it's important that we're all subjected to that and understand the reasoning why they would look at it that way. But again, I thank everybody for popping in and joining us. You guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you. Let's see. I don't know if I'm doing a show next week. And I say that because of the 4th of July week. I've got so much going on that week. I'm really reluctant to just pre-record a show and put it up. I mean, I could just so there's some content there. But really, the heart and soul of this show has always been the live stream of it, the ability for the chat to ask questions and be a part. And so we'll have to see. I'll plant the seed now that if you see a little post saying, hey, look, here's an announcement, we're not going to be doing the show this week, we'll see you next week on the 10th. That's why. But we'll figure this out. I appreciate you guys showing up tonight. And again, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. Hit the like button on the video on your way out the door. I'll thank you in advance.